I'm Mark Heinlein, Training Director for the National Tile Contractors Association. I am glad you are attending this pre-recorded NTCA virtual workshop on the ins and outs of layout. NTCA's training team will return to our regularly scheduled live workshop programming as soon as we are able to gather safely with you at our many fine host locations across the United States. Please go to our website at www.tile-assn.com, click Education and Certification, click Free Educational Workshops, then locate a workshop near you and attend. We are looking forward to seeing you at one of our many live programs in the near future. Keep checking back to see when we are back on the road. For now, sit back and enjoy our program from May 14th. You'll want to stay right to the end. See you next time. Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Mark Heinlein, Training Director for the National Tile Contractors Association. Thank you for attending today's virtual workshop. The title of today's program is The Ins and Outs of Layout. Our sponsor for this presentation is Daltile in Torrance, California. Welcome, Daltile, Torrance, California, and thank you for hosting us and sponsoring us today. We're very glad to be working with you. Today's program will be muted. Please use the questions button on your computer to type in your questions. We will answer your questions at the end of this presentation. You can also adjust the split screen at the top of your monitor to adjust the size of the videos that you see right now, me and Randy on, to increase or decrease the size of the presentation. If the audio on your computer is poor, call the number on your invite to this virtual workshop to listen in on your phone. Today's speaker is Randy Fleming. He is a trainer and presenter for the National Tile Contractors Association. He is a longtime tile industry professional, having worked continuously in commercial tile installation for 41 years, since 1979. Along the way, he has achieved 5 of the 7 available advanced certification for tile, that's ACT certifications. Randy brings with him a wealth of knowledge and experience to every program he presents at our industry's national trade shows, NTCA workshops, and regional training programs. I am certain you will enjoy learning many things from him during this webinar. Welcome, Randy.
Well, thank you, Mark. Appreciate the nice introduction there. Also want to express appreciation to Daltile, their customers, the people that work with them that they've invited to this virtual workshop. So glad you guys could be here. Hope you're staying safe. Hope things are still working well for your business. And hey, what a great way to spend hour and a half with us. Make sure that you're doing things right to make sure that when you're done with an installation, not only looks good, your customers are happy, you get more repeat work, and that's always the best kind of work to get. So I'd like to thank you for that. Now, Mark did mention at the top of your screen, if you have questions, and I can tell sometimes I can generate a number of questions just simply by what you see on the screen. So if that generates some questions, some thoughts you have, make sure you click on that question button. It'll have a little screen you can type in a question and shoot away. Ask Mark some good questions, and we'll see if we can answer them at the end of our program. So once again, thanks for attending. We're going to talk today about the ins and outs of layout. So what are some of the basic things we're trying to cover today? Well, how do we simply square a room if we're laying out floor tile? How can we do that? A number of different ways. We'll talk about that. If we're laying out our room, say on a floor, what's the advantage of using a grid system instead of just simply stacking off of spacers? How can that help us? If we get into a room, into a house, walls, bathroom, kitchen, whatever the case may be, what's the focal point? What's the main thing that needs to look good in a tile installation? Because sometimes in an installation, sometimes you can choose one or the other. Sometimes you don't always get the best layout that gives you perfect tile layout everywhere. Sometimes you have to make uh, uh, allowances because the size of the tile that dictates how the cuts will be throughout the house. So how do we determine what the most important areas are, or the focal point? If we get to an inside corner, once we're laying like a pattern tile, how do we make sure that we make that inside corner look really nice so the pattern ties through nicely? We'll talk about that, different ways of doing that. If we're doing a job of any size, mostly a bigger job, it's an excellent thing to do mock-ups. We'll talk about some of the advantages and how to do mock-ups before we start tile installations. And then simply some tips and techniques to make your layout better so that the finished project looks better, you get more repeat work, and you get happy customers, and then that simply is going to raise your bottom line. So let's get into it. Let's talk about squaring up a room. Here we have a nice rectangular room. Now, how can we do that? Well, let's just say you can pick any number you want, but let's just pick for this case here. We're just going to pick 10 inches off that wall. We could then snap a line off those two 10-inch marks. We could then measure from that line back to the wall all the way through multiple times, make sure that it stays 10 inches, make sure that there's no bows or dips in that wall. Off of the end wall, then we could come back and make a mark at 10 inches back, just to give us an intersection. Any number would work, but since we're going 10 inches off our long wall, we'll just come 10 inches off of the short wall as well, because we're just really trying to square the room and determine what kind of shape this room is. So from that first 10-inch mark that we make off the short wall, we would then measure 4 feet, and we'll make a mark at 4 feet from there. And we want to be really, really precise with this. We want to be exact. So sometimes we have to, what it's called is burn an inch, burn 2 inches, lose a couple inches on the one end of the tape measure, and so that you're using the middle of the tape and not marking off the end, because you know the end of the tape measure sometimes can move a little bit. Sometimes that can throw you off being out of square. So we're looking for a 3, 4, 5. So off the long wall we would go 4 foot. Off the short wall we would then, off that intersection, we would measure up and mark a 3-foot arc off of that 10-inch mark that we made there. Then we take off of the 4-foot mark we made, and on a diagonal, we then strike a line at 5 feet at that intersection. We arc a line there. At that intersection, that is exactly 90 degrees from that long wall, the mark on that long wall. So then we would just simply snap our line, making sure our chalk line goes directly through the middle of that intersection. So that means we're going to have a perfect 90-degree corner that we're starting off with. So 3, 4, 5. 3, 4, 5 is the mathematical formula to come up with that has been used to determine a 90-degree angle. So that is how you come up with a 90-degree angle. Now, if this was a huge room like a mall or something like that, it could be 30, 40, 50, or 300, 400, 500. Or 6, 8, 10, any multiple of 3, 4, 5. Then usually you want to go the biggest multiple you can fit. You don't want to go 3, 4, 5, 3 foot, 4 foot, and 5 foot if you've got 100-foot long lines going in both directions. You want to get those lines nice and big, get as far out as possible, and that'll make you even more precise in your lines being square. So now we've got our line square. So now we can measure off of that square line. So we checked down that short wall when we made our very first 10-inch marks, and we checked to make sure that wall was straight. And guess what? That one is nice and straight. And guess what? When we measure from that one to across the room, from both ends of the room, that wall is 84 inches. So that wall is nice and straight. Then we can do the same thing off of the other 10-inch mark. We can measure there and measure from short end of room to short end of room. And at the top, we're 119 inches. And guess what? At the bottom, we're 120. That's an inch difference. If that happened to work out full tile at the top of the room there, and then we worked our way back towards this bottom right-hand corner, we would have a 1-inch sliver. It would start off as 0, and we would start off with little slivers getting bigger and bigger till a 1-inch sliver. That would look horrible, because what we're looking to do is we want to be centered and balanced. So how does this help us? We know if the room's square, we can adjust our cuts to make sure we have equal size cuts on both ends and both long sides, keep our cuts equal, keep our cuts balanced. So if you were to come up with a 1-inch cut at the far end, obviously that we would need to shift our pattern. So if you had started with a full tile and you ended up with a 1-inch and say this was a 12 by 12 tile, all you would have to do is start with a 6 or 6.5 inch. And when you got to the other end, guess what? You'd have about a 6 or a 6.5 inch down there as well. Then you would be centered and balanced, and that's per our ANSI standards and our TCNA handbook. So those are the industry standards for when we do our layout. It needs to be centered and balanced. So this is just another example of using the laser square and 345. We could use the stick rulers, and you could see how they're lined up right off of the exact inside corner of that laser square. Measure out 3 foot, measure up 4 foot, and then when we've done that, the diagonal measurement in between would be 5 foot or 60 inches. So that's also another good way to make sure that our laser is working. We can check our laser, make sure it's still focused and shining at exactly a 90-degree angle. Because sometimes if you trust it every time, sometimes you'll see as you start to lay tile, something's not quite working right. Well, maybe the laser's been dropped. The helper dropped it and surprise, they didn't tell you about it. So make sure that your laser, every once in a while, check it. So if we're going to use a laser, got to make sure we have our charger with us. Many times you need batteries, extra batteries. So you get out to a job, guess what? Don't have any more AA batteries in the truck. So now either you're not going to use your laser or you're taking a quick run to town to go pick up some batteries. Time killers. What happens if the laser got damaged? What's your backup plan? Well, that's what 345 would be. That would be your backup plan and a way to check your laser. You'd use your 345 and you'd be able to snap out your lines. So obviously here, did they use that laser and check their room for square? Maybe they did, but maybe they just forgot. Maybe they just checked one end of the tub. Hey, it's full tile here. Hey, it's going to be a great day. As they started to lay tile and come back across here, they ended up with a 1-inch cut. The thing that you can't see is on the bottom of the page that this bathroom, this hotel bathroom, started with a full tile along the long wall. That's a good look. I agree with that. But to have a 1-inch sliver from a 1-inch down to nothing, that looks horrible. So many times what we would want to do is one, try to get our contractor to get in there and get that tub straightened out. If we had our grid lines, our square lines, control lines pulled through that room, we would have been able to measure from here and say, oh, guess what? That's 10 inches there. We come down here. Oops, that's 11. That's not going to work. We would know that before we ever started to lay tile. We could then ask the question. And then another thing we could do is start with a 1-inch cut along the long wall. And we would end up with a 2-inch cut here, tapering down to a 1-inch cut there. It's still got a 1-inch taper, but it's a lot less noticeable going from 2 to 1 than it is from 1 all the way to 0. So we need to make sure that we square up a room, establish our square, make sure everything's straight, and then we work from there. That's how we check rooms out. So how do we establish our control lines? Once again, back to ANSI, we want to be centered and balanced. So here's a good way. These lines would be centered both directions, right? 6 foot and 6 foot, and then 10 foot from the short side. So you got a 20 foot by 12 foot room. So if we have those lines established, we could then measure and make sure our lines are square. We could then measure to make sure maybe at 10 feet at full, maybe this is 12 by 12 tile that happens to lay out on the 12-inch module with a grout joint. Guess what? 10 feet, that would be full tile both right. You'd have 120 full pieces of tile in that room if it laid out and left you enough room for a perimeter expansion joint. So we center, we balance, but if we happen to do that and we ended up with a small cut, what could we do? We'll find out about that here in just a couple slides. But back up to this one here. Once again, if we're squaring up a room, that was a 12 by 20. And a laser square will work in a room like that as long as it's not too bright in there. But if you have a smaller room, sometimes a laser square works fine. But what happens if you're in a little shower? Well, sometimes you can just simply, like in this picture here, just use a framing square, snap a line off of your long wall, the longest wall that's in your shower. use a framing square to establish another line, maybe use a level with it as you see here, and then establish your square that way. So plus a laser, sometimes after about 20 feet, a laser square sometimes gets pretty difficult to see, especially if it's a little bit bright inside the room. So some different things you want to keep in mind. So lasers are great for certain size rooms, but you start getting into 50, 100 feet and things like that, very, very difficult to see. And as you keep getting further from the laser device itself, that line will start off at maybe 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. And when you're about 50 feet away, it's a solid 1/4 of an inch wide. So that line keeps fanning out wider the farther it gets from the device. So we can square up our room, different things, just simply a framing square can work. But then that also helps us to determine whether or not our walls are square and parallel with each other. So if we had made our lines in the middle of the room, this is what I was talking about earlier, and then we laid our tiles, say this was an 8'6" by 8'6" room. If you started dead middle and when you started laying tiles here, 4 full tiles, you would end up with a 3-inch cut. Well, back to our standard. What's our standard? Half or larger. So what would you do? See, this is centered on the grout joint. What you could do is move it, and instead of centering on the grout joint, center on the tile. So you'd move that line a half a tile away. By doing that, that's 3-inch cut that we seen in the previous slide right there on the previous picture there. Instead of being a 3-inch, we would add 6 inches to it. Now that's a 9-inch cut. So you would end up with a 9-inch cut on both sides. That's how you end up with centered and balanced and cuts half or larger. So that's how you're able to establish all that. Now, sometimes obviously it's going to get more difficult depending on the configuration of the room, how many different walls, hallways, things like that that you have to deal with. But this is the standard that we work from, and we try to balance our layout the best to give us the best look overall. So that's the way we can do that. Once we have our control lines established, then we need to set up a grid. So if these middle 2 lines were our control lines, how big do we make our grid? Well, let's use that example of a 12 by 12 tile. At 12 by 12, if they were 12 by 12 nominal size, say 11 3/4, and we add a 1/4 inch joint, another 11 3/4, add a 1/4 inch joint, that's 24 inches. So every 24 inches, we would make a mark. So 2 foot, 4 foot, 6 foot, 8 foot, both directions, top and bottom. Once we snap out that grid, once we start to lay tile, we have to then make sure we hit tile in the same corner every time. And if you're working from the bottom here, say we were working across the room, it's easier if you're hitting this tile on the line right in front of you instead of holding off the line. It's more accurate to do that. So that tile will be exactly on the line, a more precise way to lay tile. And so once you have that grid pattern established, you are then able at any point in that room, you can start laying tile as long as everybody is hitting in the same corner. So you can put multiple tile setters in multiple rooms. You just have to make sure everybody hits the same corner. Because if in this instance, say one person was working one room and they worked to the left, the other person was working in the other room, worked to the right, you would have a 1/2 inch grout joint when you tied the two together. So it's imperative that everybody's on the same page. Sometimes somebody could go through and mark a corner, mark an X in the corner of each one of the grids, or at least in one of the corners in each room, so they know what corner, depending on what tile setter goes in there, they would know what corner to hit. And also another thing is you want to make that to a size that you can reach. 24 inches is a good distance to reach. It's not too far. You can get up to 30. 30 is not bad either, but that starts to push it. At 30 inches, that's a pretty long reach, especially if you're trying to reach that far piece, press it down and collapse the ridges so we get 95% coverage. At 30 inches, if you're reaching out that far, that can be a pretty stressful day working that at that kind of distance. So now let's do one more time through this. Let's work on once again, a standard, kind of like that hotel bathroom that had the tub that wasn't square, had the taper cut. So this is the same type of a bathroom here. So what would we do? Measure off the long wall, 2 feet, both all the way. And that would be depending on whatever tile is you're using. As we see up here in the top picture, it would be the measuring from the edge of one tile to the edge of the third tile. So it would be 2 tiles plus 2 grout joints. That's the size of the grid. So in this case, as we've been talking about, we'd make it 24 inches. So we'd come over 24 inches at the top, 24 inches at the bottom, snap our line, 24 inches from the top wall there, come down, make a mark. We would scribe out here at 3 foot, come down here 4 foot, make a scribe there, and then swing the arc at 5 foot, and that would be our intersection. We would snap that. And guess what? We look at this picture right here. Hey, this is going to be a good day. We're starting full tile down the long wall, no cuts, starting at the top. No cuts down the tub, no cuts. This is going to be a good day. You can see over here right by the door, full tile along that wall. Hey, this is a great way to do our layout, isn't it? But oops, hold on. Do you notice the problem? The door typically will be halfway or at least another inch before we get to the center of the door. If we don't do that, then whatever the finish is outside will be coming through underneath the bathroom. And if we try to get under the door and put a 1-inch sliver there, that's going to look horrible. We got all this nice full tile in there, and then you have a 1-inch sliver right at the door, right when you walk in. That would not be a good look, and that would be a cut less than half. What could you do? Well, simply this line right here, see where it's at the short side of the pony wall? If we brought that line right down to the long side or to this other side of the pony wall, that's about 3-4 inches. If we drop these lines 3 to 4 inches, that would then make this cut here somewhat of a 8-9 inch cut at the doorway. That would be a good size. And yes, you would have about a 3 or 4 inch cut at the top up here, but it's at the far end of the room, back by the tub. So that might be a better way to do layout, and it's definitely going to be better than having a 1-inch sliver at the doorway. So here's an example of how the grid system would work in something bigger. This is an entire house using the grid system. So a little tough to see, so we highlighted the chalk lines. So the lines have been chalked out ahead of time. Layout's been done, figuring out balancing cuts. If we notice here in the picture on the right here along this wall, it's a full tile. If they had just simply shifted this tile a little bit back towards us, that would have put a sliver down that wall, down that hallway. That wouldn't have looked good. So these are multiple things that you can check when you're doing a grid system. You can check every room, every cut once you snap out your grid system. And if you happen to get to one place that's really visible and it's a really ugly cut, you can then go back and make some adjustments in your layout before you start laying tile and then coming out and saying, oh my, what did we do? How do we fix this now? Most of the time, it's a very difficult proposition once you get into that. So that's how a grid system can help us. Other ways it helps us is, say if there's an island like you see here. Here we see they've started laying tile around the island. If you have somebody that starts tile around the back side of the island working their way this way, and you have another tile setter working on this side, if you don't have the grid system, if you're working off of, say, just spacers, very easy to get off. And so when you come back here to line up, then you have these stair step grout joints. Does not look good. But with the grid system, with everybody hitting their chalk lines in the right direction, they're able to go through, hit the right corner, and then they tie in. Everything lays out perfectly. Other advantages to the grid system is once you snap out those lines, your tile, your finisher or helper can go ahead of you and pre-cut every cut in that house ever before you get there. So that when you're in a room laying tile, you're not waiting for cuts to be made. Those cuts are there. If they had been cut on a wet saw, they're there. They're already been cleaned and dried. So by the time you get there, they're ready to install. It's going to make you faster. So if you were to be laying tile in here and trying to use spacers, sometimes it would be difficult to come in here because you don't know where you're at yet until you finish the one room, bring your row of tile around. Very easy to get out of square. So that's some of the great advantages to using the grid system. When you snap out ahead of time, you'll know every cut before you begin, and just a simply much better way to install tile. You can have, like I said earlier, multiple installers working in the same area. Everybody's going to work to the line. And so everybody, as long as they're working to the same line, we just make sure of that. And everybody's on the same page when you're done. Everything ties together nicely. No grout joints have these, start having that stair step as you look down them. So very good way to install tile. So that's for floors. We can use the same type of process, same thought process if we're laying out for wall tile. If we're laying wall tile, say this is a tub deck that's out of level, We could then find the low spot of the tub, make our measurement if a full tile gives us the size cut we need at the top. So we're wanting to balance top and bottom, left to right on every wall. So if that works, we would figure out whatever our size tile is. We'd then mark a level line across the bottom of our wall. We could then put up a ledger board or something like that that we could stack our tile off of. We would then measure and find the center of our wall. If the center of our wall is exactly how it gives us a good cut on both sides, half or larger, then we would plumb a line there, make a vertical line. If we're vertical and plumb and horizontal and level, then we're square. So that's the exact same thing that we were doing with the 3, 4, 5. You could, in theory, do the same thing on a wall. You could measure over 3 foot, 4 foot, and then 5 foot, and then square. Yes, you could in theory, but simply if you're plumb and you're level, you are going to be square. So if you do that, you have your center point. You're then able to start laying tile. If you start from the center, you don't want to go all the way up, and you don't necessarily want to go all the way horizontal. You want to kind of work it in a stair-step pattern so that you don't get locked in any one direction. If you stack this half of the wall, say you started here on this back wall, and you stack this from the ledger board all the way up, and then you came over and started the next course, maybe you're out of some different boxes. All it takes is just being off the slightest amount, and we can start having problems tying in. So if we work up this way, we want to be also continuing kind of in a pyramid fashion, working, stacking our wall tile so that we don't get locked in or pushed one way or the other because of our tile joint sizing. If we use spacers, this is spacers gone wrong right here. This is not what we want to see at all. We notice here in the picture on the left, there's a spacer. I don't even know what good it's being used for. One, the finisher grouted right over the top of the spacer, so that's a no-no. We don't leave spacers in. That's not what they're meant for. They're meant to hold tile in place until it dries, not to leave in as used as a grout filler. So that's not the right way that those are used. Also, here in the picture on the right, notice that the spacer is actually underneath the tile. How can they have a bonded floor tile if this is on a floor? And if that spacer's underneath the corner, one of the weakest points in a tile on a floor is the corners and the edges. That's why it's required that all edges and corners are fully supported. And if it's a dry area, it's 80% coverage. Those ridges have to be collapsed in our thin set, so we need 80%. And if it's a wet area, that's 95%. So we have to make sure that we don't let spacers get in the way of doing our work properly. And that's exactly what you see going on here. So how do we properly use spacers? Well, here's another example of how we can use spacers. We can use these hard plastic, like horseshoe shims. They come in the blue and the red you see there. Here's the yellow and black. Different colors mean different thicknesses. That's a 1/4 inch thick. That's a 3/16 thick. The reds are 1/8, and the blue are 16th. And that's standard. Some different companies have different colors for different sizes, but that's kind of a standard. Other things that can be used is rope. Rope can be used. Rope has been used for a long time. It's a very good way to lay tile quickly. We can stack off of rope. If you use a softer rope like this cotton rope, sometimes it will compress and be hard to pull out, and that joint that you started off with this big, as you stack 7 feet of tile, that weight of tile pushing down on it, those joints at the bottom, instead of being the 1/8 of an inch the rope is, that rope will compress and you'll probably be at about a 1/16 of an inch. So you need to use the right kind of rope, especially if you're stacking larger and heavier tiles. The rope needs to be able to hold that weight up. There's a yellow twisted poly, comes in many different sizes, and it can help support larger tile. We can use our spacers, and that'll help us with a story pole. What's a story pole, you might ask? Well, we need to know how big those tiles are going to lay out on the wall, a tile plus a joint. So here's an example on the left. They laid it out on a bench. They used an edge to make sure they're nice and straight, and then they marked every other joint on this straight edge. An example of that is also on the right. Use a straight edge, stack your tiles against it so you're nice and straight. Put your spacers in that you're planning on using, and here's an example of using something as simple as a float strip, and then marking the float strip, every joint, and then we could use that float strip, go around the room, and we would know exactly what size cuts we would have top and bottom or side to side, depending on the direction this tile hits. Now, what am I talking about? Let's look at it in practice here. Here's two guys, they're using a laser and a story pole together. The laser, they would have established where the high point or the low point of the room was, depending on their bottom course that they're trying to set. And they would then measure where they want that tile to start at. And then they could use that laser and story pole, go through and mark. And now they're doing a grid system. Every 2 feet or every 2 tiles, you notice, they will have a mark. They'll be able to snap in a grid all the way around that room, and then they can then go through, spread their mortar, install their tile all the way around that room using the grid system, using a story pole and a laser to keep them straight and level, and then as well as plumb. So when we do things like this, if we take the time to do our layout right, when we get to patterns, such as the examples that you see here, patterns can cause some people some problems. Spoke with a nice lady today. She had some issues with the tile pattern. And where was the problem noticed? At the inside corner. Spent a ton of money on this tile, and he did a bad job on the inside corner. That was the first thing that was noticed. And then it revealed other problems about the installation. But if we look at the picture on the left, that's a fantastic job. That pattern just folds nicely through that inside corner. You almost can't even tell that that's an inside corner. Well, that's a folded inside corner. If we're laying this wall here on the left first and then the wall to the right second, we would make these cuts at where the intersection of the two cuts would be. We wouldn't take this cut all the way to the back of the substrate, because the piece that would be left over then would be too much smaller and the pattern wouldn't fold nicely as it does here. So that's basically a 45-degree angle, those two cuts meeting up in the corner, and then we would leave room for a silicone or a sealant joint in between that. On the right, it's the same type of thing. It's a 12 by 24 tile. So with a 1/3 offset, that's our maximum offset. We should be setting a 12-inch tile on, or a 24-inch tile because it's over 15. So a 1/3 offset would be our maximum offset, is the recommendation that we have. So if we ended up with, if this is a 24, we ended up with a 16 here and an 8 up there. The leftover of the 8 is a 16, and the leftover of the 16 is an 8. So we would fold that inside corner and continue. That would start our pattern for our next wall. So that's an example of a folded inside corner. Another example could be a mirrored corner. So whatever the cut is on the left, we need to start with the exact same cut on the right so that pattern follows right through. So in both instances, you see good examples of that. In both cases also maybe a little bit tight. We need at least an 1/8 of an inch gap in there to allow for sealant in there, to allow for movement. If we try and just keep them tight like that and grout them, that's asking for a failure in the future. So we want to make sure we give our tile room to move, because it's going to move. So we talked earlier, mentioned that this was one of the things we'd talk about is a focal point. So what's the focal point of this room? What do you think it is? Well, time's up. Any number of things. It could be if I'm walking in there, if I'm talking about the floor tile, the first thing I see when I walk, I would want to make sure this was a good looking cut right inside the door. As I come in and look at the shower, maybe this is the focal point. Maybe they've spent a lot of money. They've got this fancy shower with all these really cool fixtures in there. So maybe these are focal points because this is where they're going to be spending a lot of time taking showers in here. Or maybe they're going to sit and relax on the bench while taking a shower. So maybe any different number of things could be the focal point. If you're coming in, walking in, maybe you can see the outside of this shower at all times from the outside hallway that's out here or the outside room. That would also want to be laid out well. What if you're a lady, you're putting on makeup? How about if you have tile, beautiful tile you've spent a lot of money on here on the backsplash? What if that's not laid out well and it's an eyesore that catches their attention all the time? So a number of different things that could be focal points. Maybe spend a little extra time over here on the throne. Hey, what happens if there's a little ugly tapering cut like we've seen in that shower and bathtub? So that would be something that would, really irk a person, that if you are always looking at that, it would be an eyesore. So what's the focal point? How do we balance the room? Where do we start setting tile? All of those things we have to find out. There's only one way to do it. We have to ask questions. We have to find out from the homeowner, the architect, who's going to be using this room, what's their idea, what's their focal point, what are their important points for laying out. Because sometimes you don't get to have you might want to have everything full tile everywhere. That's simply not going to happen, especially with these neo angles. So there might need to be trade-off, especially once, as we've seen some of those previous pictures, depending on pattern. So we want to make sure that we have that discussion ahead of time. So here's an example. Is this right? Well, take a look. There's our cut on our left. There's our cut on the right. They're fairly close in size. So from side to side, they're not bad. We look here though at the window. It's full tile there on the right, and on the left, that's a small 2.25 or so inch cut. Someone might say, though, that might not look good. Well, your only choices is if you shift one way or the other, you're going to either put a sliver up this wall to shift it that way and maybe make this cut bigger. But if we make this one bigger, that's going to make that cut smaller. So as far as I look at that, as far as centered and balanced, I don't see a problem going left to right. But what do you see at the bottom? How are they for centered and balanced top and bottom? Simply all they had to do was start with a smaller cut at the bottom instead of a full tile. Maybe start with a 2.5 inch, add 1.5 inches or so to that 1/2 inch cut. Be 2.5 inches at the window would be a much better case. So that would be something that could be done instead of starting full tile. Easy, I agree, but it's not always the best layout. But you notice something else that kind of catches your eye. How about that soap dish? See, you've got that window is in the somewhat middle of that wall, but at least if they had moved the soap dish and centered it under that window, that also wouldn't be an eyesore. So any number of different things that we need to consider when we're doing a layout. We talked about doing a mock-up. Mock-up is important, especially you have different size tiles, different colors, different finishes, different thicknesses. That's what modularity is. If we have, such as in this example, a pattern that uses like a 12 by 18, a 12 by 12, a 6 by 6, and a 6 by 12, all multiples of 6, so they can work in a pattern like this. But they have to be these tiles have to be planned or designed to be used in this pattern. If we just happen to get a 6 by 6 and I like this other 6 by 12, this 12 by 12 of this other manufacturer I love, very unlikely that they're all going to work together and have that modularity. So a mock-up will help us with that. We can set it up like here we have an example right inside the door, layout's done centered on the doorway with the largest tile. Nice way of doing that. Tile thickness can be considered, the color range, even grout joint sizes, all of that. Here's my idea. And so instead of just starting and finishing the house and then them walking in, oh my gosh, that's not what I thought this was going to look like. That's not the time to do it. A mock-up establishes all these things. It establishes the pattern, all these different variables, and it establishes your standard of work that you're going to deliver throughout the house. Because if you start this way, you can use this. This is my standard. This is what I'm going to give you through the rest of your house or building or whatever the case may be. If you do that, you then get it approved. They need to sign it. They need to send you an email, an approved email. Your mock-up's been approved. Please proceed. Now you are protecting yourself, your company, by doing mock-ups. Do you think that that's what the owner had in mind when they designed these bathrooms or this bathroom here? Simply had they did the grid pattern and then measured, they would have seen this before they started laying tile at the far end, coming over here, noticing an ugly taper cut. Simply, and they'd started with a big cut at the far side of the room. If it simply moved over, as we see here in that where that base piece is, had they moved the full tile to that wall there, it would have ended up a nice large cut there. They still would have had their full tile at the inside corner and just a little bit larger cut at the far side of the room. So we can see if you do things right, it looks good, like the lady's doing on the right-hand side, making sure she's following her pattern, keeping herself plumb with the laser and with the level. A nice looking job. And the picture on the right, obviously, that's a horrible example. Probably two guys started at the far end of the room. One went left, one went right, and when they came back and tied in together, maybe their levels weren't quite on the same page. And so they had this creative way to do it, but eyesore, definitely an eyesore. So we don't want to do anything like that or have things that look like this. Oh, this is horrible. So if we're doing layout, we need to figure out who's making the decision. If it's a large job, a lot of times an architect, designer, send them an email. Where do you want the layout to start? How do you want the layout to proceed? Could be the owner, could be the general contractor, could be the builder, but sometimes it could be you as the tile contractor, as the tile installer. The only question is if these other people aren't making the decision and you are, you have to be able to defend your layout. And if you come up with a floor that looks like this, and I happen to have money that I was able to have a business, and that's what you gave me for a floor, or maybe this was my rec room, and this is what, that's a wreck right there. You would be wrecking out half of the tile on that floor and fixing and getting that ugliness in the middle of the floor, getting rid of that. So if we're making that decision, we have to be able to defend our layout. We need to be centered, balanced, and make sure we're using the right type of corners on the inside, so we have a good looking layout. So one thing, you got to be done listening to me talk. So let's watch a few videos. We're going to see how something that might seem as simple as a shower, how difficult can that be to lay out? Well, let's take a look and see as Mr. Scott Carruthers helps us to lay out as something that might look like a simple shower. Let's see some of the challenges that can come from that.
We've been learning about layout throughout this program. Now we're going to learn how to lay out a stall shower so that we're plumb and level, that we have balanced cuts left and right, and also top and bottom. When we do our layout, we couldn't use a measuring stick or a measuring tape to determine what our line is going to be, including a tile and our grout joint, in this case using a 3/16 inch spacer. And we can do that, but when we get into all those 16ths, sometimes it gets a little bit confusing. So what we can do is make a story pole, and this is really nothing more than a wooden stick like a lattice strip, and we're going to lay that down. We're going to put our tile against our straight edge, and we're going to line this stick up along the edge of the tile. So we have a tile and a grout joint, tile and a grout joint. So every time we have a line, that's the top of the tile. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. And we did that the whole length of our stick so that when we transfer it to the wall, once we're in there, we don't need to do anything with the measuring stick as far as our layout. And I'll show you that next. So now we're going to determine our center point, and our wall is 83 3/8 in height, and half of that is going to be 41 11/16. So I already have my tile and my ANSI requirement for a 1/4 inch movement joint at the bottom, and I put a piece of cardboard under there just to simulate the thickness of the thin set. So I'm going to come up off of there 41 11/16. So I place that mark right here. This is now my center line. I've aligned my story pole with my center line, and I follow my coursing the whole way up for my tile. When I get to the top, there's the top of my last tile, and we are 3/8 of an inch. That's not going to be a very acceptable piece. And when we get to the bottom, we've got 3/4 of an inch, which is not an acceptable piece either. So what we've got to do is make an adjustment for the size of the tile. So in this case, the tile we're using is a nominal 4 by 16, but the actual measurement is 3 15/16 by 15 3/4. So if we measure up, half that tile would be 1 15/16 inches. We come in, we move that mark up, we strike our line, and put this level mark the whole way across our unit. So if we put our mark here in that alignment, we notice now at the top we have a much larger piece, which will be exactly the same as the piece at the bottom. So now we have a piece about 2 5/8 at the top and a piece 2 5/8 at the bottom. We have an excellent layout because it is centered and balanced top and bottom. So now we've got our level line on our back wall. Now we're going to transfer that line around to the other wall where we have a niche, and we want to see how we're going to key out to the niche. So we extend our level line the whole way across. We bring our story pole over. We line it up with any mark because they're all the same. We measure and find that we have a 2-inch cut above the niche, and we have a 2 5/8 cut at the bottom of the niche. Not bad. They're not perfectly balanced, but it's not bad. So that's good. So we move over here to our knee wall or our pony wall, and we have to figure out where are we for how that's going to key in. So I key in here to my level line. This is sweet. If you can see this right here, my top of that tile is exactly the top of my pony wall. This is a great layout. We've got a full tile here. We've got a 2 5/8 top and bottom. We've got a good cut on the up top and the bottom of the niche, and we are just about good to go. We now have our seat in place. We already know that it's level, but now we've got to meet the ANSI requirement of 1/4 inch in 12 inches slope to drain. So I've got my level in place. I've got 2 horseshoe spacers here that are going to give me that 5/16. I place that under there. That is dead level, so that means I have the appropriate slope to drain, and we are ready to go. Now we want to check and see if we have an appropriate piece at the installed tile. So I have a piece of tile and cardboard. I measured down from my story pole, and I am 11/16. Now I want to move to the front of the bench to see what my cut be in that place. So I measure down from my level line, and I am exactly 1 inch. So that means that I'm going to have a 11/16 sliver here, and I'm going to have a tapered sliver here going up the bench, which is not acceptable. We can fix that in one of 2 ways. This bench is mounted on brackets, so we could actually remove the bench, move the brackets up, say 1 1/8 inch, 1/4 to make sure we don't have any deviation in those pieces, put it back in, waterproof it. We now have a cut tile back here, and we have a full tile coming right along the edge here, and we are good to go. Second way we could do this, we could leave the bench in place, laminate another piece of foam board on top of it that would be 1 inch, waterproof it properly, and we've solved the problem. So now we're ready to set tile. But first, we've got to determine the size of our back wall. So we're going to measure this back wall. It's 46 1/4. So we're going to come over and divide that in half, and our half measurement is 23 1/8. So I'm going to strike a line at 23 1/8. And that's our center line. I'll take my level and get a nice line established here that's going to be perfectly plumb. So we now have our actual point where we're going to start tile. So I've made some faux tile here because these are easier to put up and put in place to give you a little bit more of a visual. So at this point, we have our new center line, and I'm going to start off of that center line, allowing my 3/16 grout joint, because that line is actually my key line for my first row of tile. So there's my 3/16 joint. I'm going to come in and I'm going to do that 1/3 offset, allowing for my grout joint, 3/16 grout joint below. And if you wanted to, you could strike a new lay line to create the edge of the tile, but that's up to you. I always use my center line as the center of my grout joint. So now I'm going to work to my next one, stack it up at that 1/3 point again, and if you need more vertical lines, you can certainly add them with your level. Let's run over this way and see what we get. There's my 3/16 grout joint. I've got my 3/16 grout joint. I'm now right on my original lay line, my level line. I install my last piece in this series. I've got my grout joint. I've got my 1/3 offset. So now we've determined our layout, and you'll see we have the stair-step pattern. Now, you could have started from this side and ran the stair step that way. Again, that might be a layout thing for your consumer or your designer. Do they want to see the stair step running this way, or do they want to see the stair step running this way? I've chosen to go this direction. So now we've got this wall all laid out. Our cut tile here is exactly the same size as this cut tile here. Well, now we're going to work around the corner. We have 3 options to create the wall on this side. I could center and balance this, making that 5/16 deduction again for the thickness of the tile on this wall, so that the piece here and the piece here are exactly the same size in the offset courses, of course. Or we can do 2 other things that we saw in the PowerPoint presentation. We can mirror this tile cut, or we can fold it. So we then start to run tile on this wall the whole way up, make our cuts, turn the corner, run this wall the whole way up, finish our knee wall. That's the 1, 2, 3 of layout for our shower today. I hope you found this to be beneficial.
Well, that was beneficial. That was a good example of just something that might seem as simple as a shower, laying out a shower. And yet look at all the different things that come into your head as you're doing that layout, all those things you need to think out before you lay your very first piece of tile. Now, how about herringbone? Sometimes herringbone on a diagonal, on a wall, sometimes that can pose lots of challenges. Let's take a look and see how Mr. Rob Roderick helps us with laying out herringbone.
We're gonna lay out this wall. And we saw earlier in the presentation that we always have to be centered and balanced. That sounds easy enough, but sometimes with a herringbone pattern, especially on the 45, it's a little bit different and it's a little bit more complicated. So we're going to lay out this module we have here with plank tile, herringbone pattern on a 45. So here's the center of from top to bottom and left to right. That's going to be our starting point. Next thing we need to do is center our tiles, put center marks on our tiles, and look at the 2 different ways to lay it out. And look at the 2 different options we'll have when we lay this out that both give us centered and balance. With this herringbone on a 45, it gives you quite a bit of difference in appearance, especially in a small little wall like this that might be an accent area or something. So let's do that next. Now we got to find the center of this tile. This tile is 36 inches long, so we know that 18 inches is going to be half of 36 inches. So we'll go ahead and mark that. And as always, we check it in both directions to make sure it's where we want it to be. And then we're going to center it in the short direction. It's 6 inches, so 3 will be our center this direction. So there's the center of our tile. You see that? Now, because we're laying this on a 45, we can use our speed square, and we can just run it through the center of that X. Both directions. All right, guys, we've got our mark on our plank tile right in the center. I just showed you how to get that. Now that we have our center part on the wall, we have our center part on our tile, we're just going to line those 2 together. So basically I'm lining one of the two lines in the X with the plumb line and the other line with the level line. And once I get them located right where I want them, I can now mark around the tile, and that's going to be the location of our first tile in the installation. We actually could take these marks off this first tile and create a chalk line as a reference line, and from that chalk line, if we were doing this on the floor, we could grid out the entire floor using this as our reference of where we wanted to start. So quick review. We found the center on our area where we're going to install tile. We found the center on our tile, and we've just lined the two up. Once we line the two up, we've traced around that tile to give us a starting point. So from here to here, we could actually create chalk lines and do a grid pattern using this first line that we get. This gives us our starting point if we want to center this way. Now, if I have an accent wall like I have right here, and I just want to lay it out and get some idea of what the cuts are going to look like, an easy thing to do is just to dry lay and mark around the tiles to see what your cuts are going to look like. So these are identical in size, they're reverse images of each other, but this is a balanced layout. And this layout shows the entire herringbone pattern. The next layout I'm going to show you is, it has a completely different look. They're both centered and balanced, but this is one that you definitely want the designer or the owner to look at both options to see which one they would prefer. I'm going to take some time and I'm going to mark out where every tile goes on here, and then I'll show you afterwards, and that way you can make a decision. You can look at your cuts at the top and the bottom and then lay it out the other way and see which way works best. Guys, we got all of our pieces laid out for our mock-up doing herringbone on a 45. You can see where we got our center mark, level and plumb, and if we look at our cuts on each side, they're exactly the same in dimensions. Another thing, these points that are coming down line up with each other and are the same distance as the points on the other side. If you look at the top, we've got this little triangle up here. You see that little piece? We've got a matching one down here at the floor, a little piece. So everything's centered and balanced. You guys saw how we did that. We just centered a tile, and all the cuts are exactly the same size. Good way to lay everything out to make sure everything's centered and balanced according to ANSI, and see which way gives you the best result. All right, guys, I just showed you how I laid out this herringbone on a 45 in one way out of the center of the tile. I'm going to show you another way that we can lay it out, which gives you a completely different look. Remember, we've got our level lines and plumb lines, and one thing I meant to mention earlier but I forgot is once you get these level and plumb lines, that's your opportunity to check everything around. Make sure that the ceiling is level, make sure that the walls are plumb, and you can use these level and plumb lines to see what condition your job site is in, and if you need to do prep ahead of time. And you want to make sure and do that prep because it can really affect the outcome of your layout. You can also lay a center mark off the end. And the way we want to do that is we want to find the center of the end of the tile. And again, these are 6-inch tiles. So I want to mark that right in the center of the tile. Double check it. Then I can take my speed square from that center point and create 2 marks. Now if I were to set this level, this one on the plumb line and this one on the level line, that would give me a center layout for my plank tile installation. So with this layout, I'm starting at the end of the tile, and you can see We're on a 45. I basically found the center of this tile and I made 2 marks at a 45-degree angle. I'm just going to line these marks up with my center marks that I have on my substrate here that I'm getting ready to tile, get them lined up. Once I do that, I can mark the location of this first tile. Okay, so that's going to be where my first tile sets. Now, if I was chalking out lines, I could use this as a reference point, come off of these marks, and chalk a line and do a grid system. But because this is just a small accent wall, I'm going to lay this out by just drawing each piece on there to see what the cuts are going to look like. So now you can see we got a basic idea of where each tile is going to go. I can go all the way through this from top to bottom, figure out what all my cuts are before I get started. Then I can show that to the design person, the homeowner, whoever makes the decisions, make sure they're aware of what they're going to get before you get started. This is another way to center, and I hope it helps you guys out.
Well, that was a very good explanation of how we can take something that could be as difficult as a herringbone layout, make sense of it, and then by doing that pre-layout like he was showing there, we could then show the homeowner a couple different options of how the cuts would look, and then they could make the decision based on what looks best to them. Now remember, the few slides back we had seen the picture, the slide that showed what's the focal point of the room. Well, let's take a look. Mark Heinlein, our training director, is going to go through and show us how he can help us to determine what the focal point is when we're looking at the floor in that bathroom.
This is a scale replica of the bathroom in the slide that we saw during our presentation. We have the toilet, we have the vanity, we have the doorway, we have the linen closet, and we have the shower. We're going to take a look at finding the focal point for this room and basing our layout on that focal point. This is the tile we'll be installing in this bathroom. It's an 18 by 18 rectified stone tile. Now, we're going to take a look at the focal point in this bathroom and determine the best layout based on the size of this 18 by 18 tile. Now, I know that the dimensions of this room are 111 inches in the long direction and 99 inches in the short direction. So what I'm going to do is take a look at multiples of that stone tile, that 18 by 18 tile. Now, we talked about a story pole in our presentation. This piece of paper represents the numbers on a story pole or multiples of that tile: 18, 36, 54, 72, 90, 108. Those will be enough numbers for us to use our tape measure, just like a story pole, to determine the best layout based on a variety of focal points. So I have my tape measure drawn out to measure the room based on the tile size and based on using this chart of the numbers that we would place on a story pole: 18, 36, 54, 72, 90, and 108. And let's start with a focal point for a full tile at the entranceway. Here's 18, 36, 54, 72, 90, and 108. Well, that leaves a 3 to 4 inch piece, a sliver, at this distant wall. And based on our ANSI standards, like we learned in our presentation, we don't want any tile less than half a tile wherever possible. Well, it's possible to not have less than half a tile here. So to make sure that we don't have a sliver over here or less than half of a tile at either end of the room, what we're going to do is place a mark at at the center of the room at 55.5 inches, and we'll adjust our tile to see if it improves the situation. Now, when we first measured for a full tile at the doorway, that was measuring for the grout joint in the middle of the room. But what if we shift our tile to the middle of the room being at the middle of the tile? What does that do for us? Let's take a look with our tape measure. We can use it just like the story pole, back it up a little bit, and I'm starting at the 36-inch mark, and I can see that I have, from the end of my tape measure to the doorway, it's easily more than half a tile. That exact measurement would be approximately 9 inches. Well, that's half a tile. That's great. So this is a good layout in this direction. All right, now let's see how these measurements lay from the short side of the room. 18, 36, 54, 72, 90. Well, you know what? We have a 9-inch tile at the back of the room. That's pretty good, right? It's half of a tile, and it's back at the very back end of the toilet. Great, we've got pretty good symmetry now. We've got about a 9-inch tile on the left, a 9-inch tile over by the door, a 9-inch tile behind the room, and we've got a full tile over here at the focal point from the toilet area, and the tile alongside the vanity. That looks pretty good as a full tile there as well. Okay, we're making good progress right now. Let's lay it out a little bit further to see how that looks. Now let's use that same technique to take a look to see where the tile falls on another focal point, the focal point of the shower entrance. So let's measure. Remember, we have a full tile working this way. I'll just mark it 18, and these are rough marks without our grout joint figured in. We're just getting an idea of what the layout would be. 18, 36, 54. Well, that works out great. We've got a full tile over here, a nice full-size tile wrapping the front end of the vanity, and a full tile lining up with the front of the curb. Perfect layout going in this direction. Now, we've got the direction this way, and we've got the direction going this way. So for a straight set layout, I'd say we've got it pretty good. Let's take a look at one more way to accomplish this. We did really well with the straight set options in both directions. We got a really good layout that I think will work good for this room, and it's very defensible. We can explain how we came to it. But let's take a look at one more way to lay this out. Let's turn this on a 45-degree angle or a diamond shape. See what that does for the room. Now I went ahead and I set my laser so that it lined up with the neo angle of the shower wall. I brought in that 18-inch tile and aligned it to my laser just to get a quick look of how that shape would fit with the flow. Now that's a pretty cool layout, wouldn't you think? So let's imagine that this tile ends here at the curb, just like that. There's our cut. And let's take a look then at multiples of our modularity of this tile. Now this is just a basic modularity again. We'll call this 25.5. That's without the grout joint. So a quick measurement in this direction tells me 36, 25. Yeah, I've got a good sized tile on the far end over there. Let's try it in this direction. We've got 49 inches, 49 divided by 25.5. That's 2 full-size tiles on that direction. The last thing we need to do is check this way, and a quick look tells me that I've got 34 inches, looking pretty good there. And then what it will be back here behind the toilet wall, 38 inches roughly. We'll have another good set of tiles all the way around the perimeter. Maybe we'll have a few small points cut here and there. We'll take a closer look at that when we grid out this floor. That will be the next step, no matter which way we go, to make sure that we set our tiles straight. So my next thing that I'm going to do is have a conversation with the owner. I'm going to tell them what I discovered in the room, and I'll give them the options of with the straight set or the diamond set. Now, this diagonal set requires more cuts require more skill requires more experience, and it all requires more time, which means more money. So there might be a change order to do that. We'll see what they want to do.
Wow, well, that was some very good pointers, very good information for us. Just sometimes things that look simple, sometimes they're just not as simple as we might think. So never know what you're going to get when you get them. So let's take a look back at what have we learned today. We've considered exactly, we need to find out what does the customer want, whether that's the architect, whether that's the homeowner, maybe it's the general contractor. Find out what it is. Do a mock-up, especially if we have a larger job. Get that done, get it documented that they've approved the mock-up. That's the standard that you're going to set your tile to throughout that job. And so get that done, get it documented, and then move on. We've seen how to square a room. A laser is great, but what happens if something goes wrong? Or what happens if you're in a big room or a really bright area? Sometimes the laser square doesn't work. So that's where the 3, 4, 5 or any multiple of 3, 4, 5 will come in well and help us out. We saw, just as Mark brought out there, what's the focal point of the room? Many different things to take into consideration when laying tile in a room like that. We've seen also how to establish our control lines, then take our measurements from there, see if the walls are nice and square, nice and straight, and then what our cuts are going to end up with. And then we've also seen how to develop a grid pattern, do it so it speeds us up. We have a better looking job in the end. And that's really what we're after. We want to have our work look good. We want to have a good reputation. And when we do that, then we're going to end up being able to demand more money for the work we do, because we are going to be in demand because we do good work. We're going to be known for that. And really, that's what the NTCA is all about, doing tile work and doing it right. Well, that's what we do trainings. So tonight we're doing this virtual workshop. We'll be coming back to Torrance to Dow Tile sometime in the near future, and we'll actually do a hands-on, a live workshop. So we'll go through a lot of the same things in a PowerPoint presentation, but then guess what? You get to come and help, and we'll actually have bathrooms and different areas laid out or mocked up, and then help you to do your own layout in these areas on like a fireplace wall, on a shower, on a bathroom floor. We put all these things out there and then give you different size tiles and help you to figure out how to do layout. And that's what NTCA is all about. We've been talking about all these different books, the TCNA handbook. You also get a reference manual from the NTCA. You get the TCNA handbook. This is another one here. Also, you get access to the technical hotline, ask questions from people like Mark and myself, and we will give you answers based on industry standards. Also available to you is vouchers. So it does cost money. Tonight you get a break on the price. Because of sitting through this, you're able to get $100 off. So at the end, you'll see my email. Shoot me a quick email. I can help get you signed up. And then, so in return from that, you get all these books that I've mentioned earlier, and then you get, out of this binder that holds $7,000 in vouchers, you get to choose vouchers. So you're already going to buy tile, and so you can go to places like, here's one tile, just simply one tile manufacturer, $200. That's almost half of your investment right there, just from one manufacturer. You still get to pick another $1,800 out of those vouchers. So if you're interested, I'd love to sign you up tonight to become an NTCA member. By being an NTCA member, then you get to be first in line for training that we have, regional trainings so in addition to our workshops that we put on, we also come and we do regional trainings. If you have yet to set the large porcelain tiles, those huge ones that are 5 foot by 10 foot, some a little bit smaller, but how do you handle it? How do you install that correctly? We do standards-based training, and we help you to do it right, help you to get so that you're learning and practicing with us instead of on your dime and with your tile out there. So you get to come practice, use the materials, set the tile itself, and learn how to do it right and how to do it safely. Another class we teach also is how to do substrate prep and then install large format tile. By being an NTCA member, you get first in the line because those class sizes are limited. So that's another one of the benefits for being a member of the NTCA. So, are you a good tile setter? Well, if you're a tile setter or tile contractor, well, you're going to say, of course I am. Well, what if the choice is between you and me, or you and someone else? And the homeowner now is trying to make a decision, or the contractor is trying to make a decision. The price is close, or maybe it's not. But what's the difference between these two tile setters or these two tile companies? Well, have your skills been evaluated by a third party? That's what the CTI, the Certified Tile Installer Program, is all about. How to, as we've talked about tonight, is so much of the test. It's a hands-on test and it's a written test. Once you pass the written test, 85% you have to pass with. Once you pass that test, then you can sign up to do the hands-on. And here's a picture of the hands-on portion. A small little mock-up like this. They give you directions, how to lay it out, how to install the tile. You take it from wood studs out to this, and you set it, grout it, put in your silicone sealant, all of that, and you have to be done in about 7-8 hours. And so you get to start at 7 in the morning, you have to be done by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's a full day. Some people don't even finish. So it's a rough day. But the thing is, it's a third party evaluation. It's not just you saying you're good. This is a third party based on the specific criteria to see how well you set tile. If you pass this test, then you get to be part of this Certified Tile Installer website and become a certified tile installer. So right now there's a special. You don't have to pay any money up front. You can register now. They'll send you the materials to study with. You can take your online test, get that passed. Once we're out of these restrictions, you can then go. We'll have tests hopefully really close to you in your local area. They're throughout the United States, and there'll be one near you. You can come, take the hands-on portion, pay the fee, which is $495. You pay that, you pass your test. Once you get that done, guess what? You also have vouchers to help offset the price of your registration. So I'd love for you to become a member of the Certified Tile Installers. So also shoot me a quick email this evening. Here's my email address. Love to have you become an NTCA member and also to become a certified tile installer. So that was our PowerPoint and our videos. And now let's turn back to Mr. Heinlein and see if we've had anybody come up with any questions that maybe we could answer.
Hey, Randy, great job. But I don't want to scare you, Randy. Be careful. Something crawled onto your head during the videos. Not sure what happened there. Oh yeah, that must be that California wildlife.
Yeah, man.
Super. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Hey, great job, Randy. Great presentation. I think all of our attendees really loved it. I got some wonderful comments from the attendees. They thought the information was really good. They enjoyed the videos. The content was good, but they do have a few questions for you. You ready for some questions?
Are they tile-based questions or this?
Well, there might be some of those, but I'm going to try to filter those out for you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. But tile questions, let's see. We've got one about the wrapped folded corners. We heard a little bit about that story. You said you talked to somebody today about that wrapped folded corner. There were some problems that pointed up, you said. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so it was something as seemingly simple as turning that inside corner, but instead of folding it or mirroring it so that the lines in this tile, this lady had worked for 6 years to save up the money for this beautiful tile installation. And she turned on the lights, everything looked great until her son came in and said, yeah, but mom, the tiles don't look right in the corners. She had this fancy pattern, and instead of them meshing nicely, they were all over the place. And so it just looked horrible. So something as simple as maybe just not doing the layout right then started leading to more questions, because she called the company up, they came back, pulled the tile off. Well, that's a ceramic tile. They were able to pop those tiles off, adjust the layout, and reinstall them. I don't know about you. When I tear out tile that I install, they usually come out in pieces, little pieces. And so she started looking at what they did. They had put globs of mortar on the back and squished them in. And so then that led to more questions. Everything in this house has been installed using this dot mount or spot mount. So just simply the layout led to some questions, led to tearing out some tile. It's probably going to lead to tearing out all the tile and starting all over again. What started the whole thing? A bad layout.
Oh, what a shame. That's a terrible story. I feel bad for her.
You've never
You
heard
know,
a
one of
story
the
like that. You've never heard of anybody spot bonding tile, have you?
Well, that's not my first story that I've heard. That's the terrible shame, Randy.
Yep.
That's what qualified labor can help with, and properly interviewing your contractor, asking for a resume, asking for professional references, asking whether they own and understand and use the ANSI standards, TCNA handbook, and methods and best practices. Um, and asking which of those methods they'll use on your installation.
Yeah.
I found that when owners have asked me that in my career, I was able to produce that, and some of my supposed competition couldn't. So I know that always helped me.
Yeah, no doubt. If they don't, I mean, if they don't have the books, I mean, to begin with, if they don't have the books, how are they going to know what's in them if they don't even have them?
Right, exactly. And that's an indication, and being a CTI is an indication that you possess that knowledge and can apply it. So
Yeah,
that all comes together, and that's what makes people qualified labor. Okay, here's another question, Randy.
yeah,
This is about using those lippage control devices. You know what I'm
yeah,
talking about, right?
yep, yep.
Um, can those be used with chalk lines?
Sure, sure. You can
Yeah.
use those with chalk lines, definitely. You can use the chalk line to control the spacing of the tile and use the lippage control device to control the elevation. But sometimes some of them have different size thickness spacers that can be used in conjunction with that. Well, sometimes if you start getting mortar in between them, that can start pushing you off of your lines, so you wouldn't necessarily always have the nice straight lines. So sometimes the lippage control device can be helping get you nice and flat, but that also begins with your substrate needs to be prepared right. So if your substrate's prepared right, sometimes you can use the lippage device to control that last tiny little bit to get it really exceptionally flat, but you don't necessarily want to use the spacers that sometimes come with those that are built in. Sometimes if you get mortar in between them, they'll push you, throw you out a square. So they have their place helping control flatness, but not controlling layout.
Yeah, great. You know, I heard you say something that was music to my ears, many things you did, but this one thing about the critical part of having the right bond coat coverage and the right support under tile corners and edges.
Yeah.
That's really important, right?
Oh yeah, that's, I mean, it's absolutely vital. If you have if it's in a wet area, maybe you're not going to break a tile by standing on it with bare feet. Okay, so maybe the tile doesn't break, but now you've got a void underneath there. Water is going to get through that because tile's not waterproof. Water will go through tile. It'll sit there and puddle in these areas underneath tile. And with that staying wet all the time, you have a little bit of organic material in there because of shampoos and conditioners and things like that. Guess what? Ripe for growing things. And that's the wrong place to grow things.
It sure is. And you know, I know I travel the United States, you know, all over corner to corner, and I've been to California, and the tile work in California is just beautiful. But in other places, I sometimes see problems. And one of the problems that I see is cracked corners on tiles. It happens, and
Sure.
it doesn't look good when it happens.
Yep,
So yeah, that's
exactly.
important. Here, somebody else was asking about you talked about layout on walls,
Yep.
and you talked about setting a level line and a plumb line. And this question is about a ledger. Do you need a ledger over a tub in a tub hop to get started?
No, no, not always, especially if your tub is level to begin with. You can stack off of that and stack your tile. No problem. Make sure you leave enough room for movement underneath your tile. TCA handbook gives you really nice details that are really bright and vivid that you can see. Make sure you get your membrane, no mortar in between your tile and your tub, so you have room for movement. But if your tub's level, no problem. You can stack right off of your tub and put your tile straight up off of that. A
Okay,
ledger's
great.
not required.
Not required. Okay, yeah, but check to make sure what the condition of that tub is in, right?
Exactly. That's the whole point.
That's
A
right.
ledger,
Okay.
a ledger, a lot of times on really large installations that I've done, a ledger is invaluable because you could find the low point of the room or whatever the case may be. So you make sure you have nothing less, no little slivers underneath it. You could put a ledger around this whole huge room, stack your tile off that. After the first day, you pull that ledger board out, then you can have an exact measurement from the tile that you've set the day before down to the floor, and you're not trying to halfway eyeball your tape measure and laser line and set it all like that. A much easier way to do that.
Exactly. Okay, that's terrific. Uh, Here's another sort of plumbing fixture related question. It was mentioned a couple of times tonight. What is a neo angle?
Well, Neo was a character in the movie The Matrix, and so
Oh yeah,
sometimes he had to dodge bullets on an angle, so that's a Neo angle.
okay. Well, how about in a bathroom?
Okay, so yeah, so just like a 45-degree angled shower or a shower with angled walls in it.
Okay, yeah, that's all it really is, right? Usually a
Yep,
corner shower too, right? Okay.
correct. Yep.
Yeah, and I was thinking about traveling the country and in places other than California, of course.
Of course.
Um,
We only have the best
one of
tile setters
one
out
of the,
here.
I know, absolutely.
I'm out here.
I know that. Yeah, yeah, and that's where you get your haircut out there,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. Um,
Yep.
right. Yeah. So I stop at gas stations. I stay at motels and hotels and eat at restaurants. And, it's a terrific life on the road. And I look at a lot of tile work. And I notice that sometimes I see, good installs, good layout, and sometimes not so good layout. Maybe a gas station bathroom, not so good. Now, is there a different set of standards for, say, my house or a gas station bathroom or a hotel? Are there different standards for all those different applications?
Well, let's go chapter and verse here on us. So this book here, it just says the handbook for ceramic, glass, stone tile installation. It doesn't say by residential, commercial, industrial installation. Well, this is the one for residential and maybe, well, that's only the one for commercial. No, that book is the same standard no matter where tile is installed. So there's one standard no matter where you're setting tile at. Same, and it's from coast to coast.
So what I'm seeing is maybe different quality of installations and maybe what the owner is willing to accept or pay for. Does that make the difference?
Yeah, a lot of times that is. A lot of times it's just um, you can have guys that are commercial setting hundreds of thousands of square feet on a job and it's precise precision work. And then you have some guy doing a backsplash, a little backsplash, and he messes it up. And vice versa. You can have the guy doing the backsplash doing perfect work, and then the guys out there doing a huge mall or something like that and just throwing tile in. So you get good tile setters, good tile companies, and bad tile companies. That's why it's essential to do your homework before you hire them. Make sure that they've got the backing and they've got the training, and they're following the standards.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And I think we have time for one last question. And this is about gridding out a floor.
Mhm.
And again, it's about spacers and gridding the floor. And the question is, isn't it faster to use spacers on a floor to set it instead of spending all of that time snapping chalk lines that smear off and all that time to measure and grid those out and snap those things? Can't you just set some spacers and go?
You can, and I've seen it. But the problem is sometimes I've tried to eyeball floors before, and just go in there. Oh, it's just a small room. I won't have any problem. I'll just use some spacers. And it's amazing how far out of square, how far racked you can get. And then you're trying to fix it as you come back, spreading grout joints on one side, tightening them up on the other, and you're just fighting it. So you're slowing yourself down. The advantage to the grid system, one, it's more accurate. And we're after being, if you do it enough times, you'll get fast at snapping out the lines. It establishes your layout. You can have your finishers making cuts ahead of you. It's more accurate. The tile isn't the thing determining your straight line. Your straight chalk lines are what are determining your straight lines. And sometimes if you get spacers in there, sometimes a calibrated tile will have a little bit of an edge to it that's at an angle. And then so depending on where you put the spacer, if you put it in only part way or all the way, it'll either push it farther apart or tighter together. So that can start giving you these crooked grout joints that you look at as you look up the floor. So there's definite advantages to snapping out with chalk lines. Chalk can sometimes be easy to erase, so there's different lines you can use, like an ink line. They make an ink chalk line. Wear some gloves, snap the lines, they're not going to go anywhere. The lines are down, people can work on it, whatever. Wash, clean your floor up, the ink line are still there, and you're ready to lay your tile.
Oh, terrific information, Randy. Well, that's all the questions we have for tonight. Thank you. That was fun talking about all of that stuff.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. And I really enjoyed your presentation. And our audience, I hope you enjoyed our presentation and found it informative. We were thrilled to have you with us tonight. And like Randy said, we're looking forward to when we can get back on the road, visit Torrance, California, see you there at the Dow Tile. Thank you for hosting us tonight. And Randy, thank you for doing such a great job this evening. Do you have any parting words for our audience?
Nope, just stay safe. And hey, when you see, glad you could take advantage of the training tonight, the little bit of online training or virtual training, but so much better once you can do it hands-on with us when we actually come and do a workshop in your neighborhood. So we'd really look forward to seeing you on the road when we get back out on the road.
We'll see you on the road. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
All right, thanks. Good night.